The morning sun cast long shadows across the playground of Bright Star's children's home. 312 children called this place home on the colony world of New Haven. Their laughter filled the air as they ran between the swing sets and climbing frames that had been built with love and hope. Lisa Brown stood at her office window watching the children play. She had been the director of this place for 8 years now. Every child here had lost their parents to the Keth Dominion raids. Some came from mining colonies that had been wiped out overnight. Others were pulled from burning agricultural worlds, where their families had tried to hide in root cellars and barns. The youngest was only 3 years old. Little Amy Chen had arrived just 2 weeks ago from the Outer Rim. Her parents had died protecting a supply convoy that was carrying medicine to sick colonists. Amy still cried for her mother at night, but yesterday she had smiled when one of the older boys gave her his dessert. Kevin Walsh walked into Lisa's office carrying a stack of medical reports. He was the facility's chief doctor and had been working with traumatized children for over a decade. His gentle hands could calm even the most frightened child, and his voice had talked many of them through their worst nightmares. "How are the new arrivals settling in?" Lisa asked without turning from the window. Kevin set the reports on her desk and joined her at the window. "Better than expected. The Collins siblings are adapting well. Jake is protective of his little sister Emma, but that's normal. He's been reading to the younger children during story time." Lisa nodded. Jake Collins was 14 and had watched Keth raiders kill his parents on a farming world called Green Valley. He had hidden with 8-year-old Emma in a grain silo for 3 days before rescue ships arrived. The boy had grown up fast, maybe too fast. "What about Sam Torres?" Lisa asked. She worried most about the quiet 10-year-old who hadn't spoken a word since arriving 6 months ago. Still not talking, but he's been helping in the garden. Roy says the boy has good hands with plants. Maybe growing things helps him feel like he's creating instead of just remembering destruction. Roy Barnes was their security chief, though his title made the job sound more serious than it was. Mostly, he fixed broken playground equipment and taught the older children basic self-defense. He was a former military man who had lost his own family to a Keth attack 5 years ago. Working with children helped him heal, too. The Bright Stars children's home sat in a valley surrounded by rolling green hills. The main building housed the dormitories, classrooms, and dining hall. Smaller buildings scattered around the grounds included the medical center, the library, and workshops where children learned useful skills. Everything was painted in bright, cheerful colors that could be seen from orbit. Large symbols marked every building as a protected civilian facility. The Red Cross of the medical center was visible from space. Signs in dozens of languages, including Keth script, clearly identified the orphanage as a non-military target protected under galactic law. Automated beacons broadcast this information continuously to any ship in the system. The children came from all over human space. There was Maria Santos from the asteroid mining stations, whose parents had died in a tunnel collapse during a Keth bombardment. Twin brothers Peter and Paul Kim had survived when their entire colony ship was destroyed while evacuating refugees. Susan Davis was only 5 when Keth raiders killed everyone in her town except her. Despite their losses, the children found ways to be happy. They attended classes in the morning, learning mathematics, science, history, and literature. Afternoons were for play, sports, and creative activities. Evenings brought group meals, study time, and bedtime stories read by volunteers from the nearby colony town. Lisa had built this place to be more than just a shelter. She wanted it to be a real home where children could heal and grow. Every child had their own bed, their own small space to keep treasures and memories. The walls were covered with artwork the children had made, bright paintings of flowers and rainbows and happy families. The kitchen always smelled like fresh bread and soup. Cook Jenny Wilson made sure every child got enough to eat and had treats on their birthdays. She kept pictures of all the children on her refrigerator and knew each one's favorite foods. When children woke up crying from nightmares, she would make them warm milk with honey and sit with them until they fell asleep again. Teacher Ellen Davis ran the school programs with patience and creativity. She understood that children who had seen war needed different kinds of lessons. Along with regular subjects, she taught them about peace, about hope, about the good things people could build together. Her classroom walls showed maps of the galaxy, with pins marking all the worlds where humans lived in safety and happiness. Roy Barnes tried to stay invisible during the day, but the children all knew him. He was the one who bandaged scraped knees and chased away bad dreams. He taught the older boys how to throw a punch properly and the older girls how to kick an attacker in the right spot. He hoped they would never need these skills, but he remembered being their age and feeling helpless. The orphanage received visitors from across human space. Families came looking to adopt children. Politicians came to make speeches about protecting the innocent. Military officers came to remind everyone why they fought. But most visitors came simply to help, bringing toys and books and offering to teach children new skills. Admiral Marcus Cole visited twice a year. His defense fleet protected the New Haven system, and he considered the orphanage part of his personal responsibility. He would walk through the grounds in his dress uniform, shaking hands with older children and lifting toddlers who reached for his shiny buttons. The children trusted him because Lisa trusted him. On this particular morning, everything seemed normal. Children played on the swings. Teachers prepared lessons. Cooks started lunch. Roy checked the security sensors out of habit, though they had never detected anything more dangerous than wild animals from the nearby forest. None of them knew that 3 Keth destroyers had entered the system during the night. None of them saw the alien ships moving toward their world. None of them heard the cold voices planning an attack that would change everything. The children of Bright Stars Children's Home played in the sunshine, safe in their protected valley, while death approached from the stars above. Admiral Marcus Cole stood on the bridge of his flagship watching the peaceful stars of the New Haven system. His fleet of 12 ships patrolled the outer edges of the system in a routine pattern they had followed for 3 years. Nothing ever happened here. The Keth Dominion had never attacked a protected civilian zone before. Lieutenant Commander Nancy Price, his communications officer, was reading reports from other sectors. Keth raids had increased lately, but they always targeted military bases or industrial facilities. They followed the galactic rules of war, even if they were ruthless about it. "Admiral, we have 3 contacts dropping out of hyperspace," called Sensor Officer Carl Wright. His voice was calm. "Ships entered and left the system every day. Identify and hail them," Cole ordered. "Standard procedure." Wright's face changed as he read his screens. "Sir, they're not responding to hails. 3 ships, destroyer class. Configuration matches Keth design." Cole felt his stomach drop. "Battle stations. All ships formed defensive positions around New Haven." The bridge erupted into controlled activity. Officers ran to their posts. Alarms sounded throughout the fleet. But even as his ships moved to intercept, Cole knew they were too far away. The Keth ships had appeared directly above the planet. On the surface of New Haven, Roy Barnes was checking the morning security reports in his small office. The sensors showed nothing unusual. A few wild deer had wandered close to the fence during the night, but that happened often. He was about to close the reports when every alarm in the building started screaming. His military training kicked in immediately. The alarms meant incoming aircraft or missiles. He grabbed his emergency radio and ran toward the main building where most of the children were having their morning classes. "Lisa, we have incoming hostiles," he shouted into the radio as he ran. "Get everyone to the shelters now." Lisa Brown was reading a story to a group of 5-year-olds when Roy's voice crackled from her radio. For a moment she couldn't move. Attacks on orphanages didn't happen. It was against every law in the galaxy. Then training took over. She had drilled for this scenario hundreds of times, even though she never believed it would happen. "Children, we need to play the emergency game right now," she said in her calmest voice. "Everyone line up at the door. We're going to walk quickly to the safe room." The children looked confused but obeyed. They had practiced this drill many times. Teacher Ellen Davis appeared in the doorway, her own group of children behind her. "Is he?" "This real?" Ellen whispered. "Yes, get them to the underground shelter, fast." In the medical center, Kevin Walsh was examining a boy with a scraped elbow when the alarm started. He looked out the window and saw something that made his blood freeze. 3 dark shapes hung in the sky above them, growing larger every second. He scooped up the injured boy and ran for the shelter entrance. Other children were streaming out of buildings all around the complex. Some of the older ones understood what was happening and helped carry the smaller children. Jake Collins had been in the workshop learning woodworking when the sirens began. He immediately thought of his sister Emma, who was in the art class on the other side of the complex. He ran through groups of fleeing children pushing against the crowd. "Emma! Emma!" he shouted. He found her standing frozen in the art room doorway, clutching a paintbrush. Tears streamed down her 8-year-old face. "Jake, what's happening?" she cried as he grabbed her hand. "We have to go to the safe place right now. Sam Torres was in the garden when the attack began. The boy who never spoke was watering tomato plants when he heard the alarms." He looked up and saw the 3 ships hanging over his home like black clouds. For the first time in 6 months, Sam Torres opened his mouth and screamed. The first plasma blast hit the school building. The explosion threw Roy Barnes to the ground as he was helping evacuate the library. Fire and smoke erupted from what had been a classroom full of desks and books and children's artwork. The second blast destroyed the workshop where Jake had been just minutes earlier. The third hit the dining hall where lunch was being prepared. Cook Jenny Wilson died instantly, still holding a pot of soup she had been making for the children. Lisa Brown reached the shelter entrance as the fourth explosion shook the ground. She was pushing children down the concrete steps when she realized that dozens of kids were still above ground. The younger ones were too scared to move fast. The disabled children needed help getting down the stairs. "Keep going," she told Roy, as she turned back toward the main building. "I'll get the rest." "Lisa, no." Roy grabbed her arm. "It's too dangerous." She pulled free. "They're my children." The fifth blast hit the medical center just as Kevin Walsh reached the shelter with his group. The force of the explosion knocked him down the steps. He felt something wet running down his face but ignored it. The boy with the scraped elbow was crying in his arms, but he was alive. Jake Collins dragged his sister toward the shelter as debris rained around them. A piece of burning metal landed near Emma's feet. She stumbled and fell, scraping her hands. On the concrete. "I can't," she sobbed. "I can't run anymore." Jake picked her up and carried her, even though she was almost as big as he was. His legs shook with effort and fear, but he didn't stop running. Sam Torres found his voice was working now. He screamed for help as he ran toward the shelter. Other children heard him and followed his voice through the smoke and confusion. The boy who had been silent for months became a beacon for lost and frightened kids. The bombing continued for exactly 7 minutes. The Keth ships methodically destroyed every building in the complex. They targeted the dormitories where children slept. They hit the kitchen where meals were prepared. They destroyed the library where stories were read and dreams were born. When Admiral Cole's fleet finally arrived in orbit, the 3 Keth destroyers were already jumping back to hyperspace. They had completed their mission and vanished into the dark between stars. The bright stars. Children's home was gone. In its place was a field of burning rubble and twisted metal. The playground where children had laughed that morning was now a crater. The garden where Sam Torres had found peace was scattered dirt and broken plants. Roy Barnes emerged from the underground shelter with 47 children. They were all that remained of the 312 who had lived in the orphanage. Some were injured. All were terrified. Many were asking for friends and teachers who would never answer again. Lisa Brown was not among the survivors. Roy found her body in the main hallway, arms wrapped around 3 toddlers she had died trying to protect. Her face was peaceful, as if she had fallen asleep reading them a bedtime story. Admiral Cole stood in the ruins as his medical teams worked to help the survivors. His dress uniform was stained with ash and blood. His hands shook as he recorded a message to be sent to Earth immediately. "This is Admiral Marcus Cole of the New Haven Defense Fleet," he said into the camera. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with a fury that would soon spread across all of human space. At Oro 900 local time, 3 Keth destroyers attacked and destroyed the Bright Stars Children's Home. 265 children are confirmed dead. This was a deliberate attack on a clearly marked civilian facility protected under galactic law. He paused and looked directly into the camera. "The Keth Dominion has just made the biggest mistake in their species' history. The news reached Earth while President Amanda Clark was meeting with her cabinet. Her aide burst into the room with a tablet showing Admiral Cole's message. The room fell silent as they watched the recording of the smoking ruins where children had played just hours before. Clark watched the message 3 times without speaking. Her face grew paler with each viewing. When it ended, she set down the tablet and looked at each person around the table. "How many?" she asked quietly. 265 children dead, 47 survivors, replied Defense Secretary Robert Lane. The attack was deliberate. The orphanage was clearly marked. The Keth ships ignored all hails and warnings. Clark closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, something had changed. The other officials in the room would later say they had never seen the president look like that before. "Call an emergency session of Congress. I want every representative and senator in the chamber in 4 hours. Also contact the Galactic Council. I will address them directly." "Ma'am, what should I tell them the meeting is about?" asked her press secretary. "Tell them it's about war." 3,000 light-years away, the Galactic Council was in regular session on the neutral world of Harmony Station. Representatives from 47 different species sat in the great circular chamber, discussing trade agreements and border disputes. Human Ambassador Daniel Green received the emergency message from Earth during a boring debate about mining rights. He read it twice, then quietly stood up and walked to the central speaking platform. "I request immediate emergency session status," he announced. His voice carried clearly through the chamber. The Altaran Council speaker, a tall, blue-skinned being, named Vexhal, looked annoyed. "Ambassador Green, we are in the middle of important business. Your request must wait." 265 human children were murdered this morning, Green said simply. "I believe that qualifies as an emergency." The chamber erupted in surprised voices from dozens of different species. The Keth representative, War Commander Tekvar, remained silent in his seat. Vexhal called for order. "Please explain the situation, Ambassador Green." Green activated the chamber's main display screen. Admiral Cole's message played for the entire Galactic Council. When it ended, the chamber was completely quiet. "The Keth Dominion attacked a clearly marked civilian facility," Green said. "They murdered children who were under galactic protection. This is not a military action. This is genocide." War Commander Tekvar finally stood up. The Keth were tall reptilian beings with rough scales and cold yellow eyes. The facility was a legitimate military target. It was training future human soldiers. "It was an orphanage," Green replied. His voice was dangerously calm. "Those were children. 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds. Children who had already lost their parents to your raids. Human spawn grow quickly into human warriors," Tekvar said. "We eliminated a future threat." The chamber erupted again. Several alien representatives shouted in outrage. Others demanded order. Green stood perfectly still in the center of it, all watching Tekvar with eyes that promised terrible things. When the noise died down, Green spoke again. "I want the Council to understand something very clearly. Humanity considers this attack an act of total war. Not military war, not political war. Total war. Every Keth facility, every Keth ship, every Keth world is now a legitimate target." The Vegan representative, a peaceful being who had negotiated dozens of peace treaties, stood up. "Ambassador Green, surely cooler heads must prevail. We can arrange mediation. We can establish new protections for civilian targets." "The time for mediation has passed," Green replied. "The Keth chose to murder our children. We choose to respond accordingly." On Earth, President Clark stood before a joint session of Congress. Every seat was filled. The gallery was packed with reporters and citizens. The entire human government was watching. Clark held up a photograph of the Bright Stars Children's Home as it had been that morning. Children played on swings under a bright sun. The image filled the screens throughout the chamber. "This is what 312 human children called home," she said. "They were orphans. They had already lost everything to Keth raids. We gave them a new family. We gave them hope. We gave them a future." She clicked to the next image, the same location, now a field of burning rubble. "This is what the Keth Dominion did to our children 6 hours ago." The chamber was dead silent. Several representatives were crying openly. The attack was deliberate. The facility was clearly marked as a protected civilian target. The Keth ignored all warnings and all laws. They chose to murder children to send us a message. Clark's voice grew stronger with each word. Today we send them a message in return. The Congress will vote on a declaration of total war against the Keth Dominion. Not a military action, not a police action, total war. She clicked to another image. General Frank Stone stood at a podium surrounded by maps and charts showing human military capabilities. General Stone will explain what total war means. General Stone was a career military officer who had fought in 12 different conflicts. He was known for his calm, professional manner. Today he looked like a man ready to burn down the galaxy. Ladies and gentlemen, humanity has always fought limited wars. We target military installations, we avoid civilian casualties, we follow the rules of civilized conflict. He paused and looked directly at the cameras broadcasting to the entire human empire. The Keth have shown us that they do not believe in civilized conflict. They believe in murdering children. We will respond in kind. Stone clicked through a series of charts showing industrial capacity, population numbers, and resource allocation. Every human factory can produce weapons. Every human ship can carry troops. Every human world can support the war effort. We have 137 colony worlds with a combined population of 8 billion people. Every single one of them is now dedicated to destroying the Keth Dominion. The room was so quiet that the sound of people breathing was audible. Total war means we target everything. Keth military bases, Keth factories, Keth supply lines, Keth communication networks, Keth food production, Keth water treatment plants. Every facility that supports their society becomes a legitimate target. A representative from the outer colonies stood up. General, are you talking about targeting civilian populations? Stone's expression didn't change. I'm talking about targeting a species that targets our civilians. The Keth wanted to show us that no human institution is sacred. We will return the lesson. Back at the Galactic Council, Ambassador Green was fielding desperate questions from other species representatives. The peaceful Alterans were offering to mediate. The commerce-focused Traders Guild was worried about disrupted shipping lanes. The military-minded Saurian Empire was calculating which side would win. Ambassador Green, said the Alteran speaker, surely humanity can be reasonable. This was the action of a single Keth commander. The entire species should not be held responsible. Green looked at the Keth representative who sat silent in his chair. War Commander Thekvar, do you condemn the attack on our children? Thekvar stood slowly. The Keth Dominion does not apologize for military actions. Do you consider the murder of 3-year-old children a military action? I consider the elimination of future threats a military necessity. Green nodded once and spoke into his communicator. Message to Earth Command. The Keth Dominion officially endorses the murder of human children. There will be no negotiation. He looked around the chamber at representatives from species that had remained neutral during previous human-Keth conflicts. For 5 years, you have watched the Keth raid our colonies. You have remained neutral. You have called for restraint and diplomacy. Today they crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. Green walked toward the exit. At the door he turned back. Humanity fought limited wars because we chose to be civilized. The Keth have shown us that civilization is a luxury we can no longer afford. What happens next is their fault, not ours. As the door closed behind him, the chamber erupted in panicked discussions. Species that had never worried about human military power were suddenly very concerned. The Keth had awakened something that had been sleeping in human space. War Commander Thekvar sat in his chair, unmoved by the chaos around him. His species had conquered dozens of worlds. They had defeated armies and toppled governments. How dangerous could angry humans really be? He would learn the answer soon enough. Within 3 days of President Clark's declaration, human space transformed completely. Every civilian factory stopped making consumer goods and started producing weapons. Shipbuilders who had been making cargo vessels began constructing warships. Mining operations that had supplied peaceful colonies now fed the war machine. Captain Tony Miller stood on the bridge of the USS Retribution. One of 50 new battleships rushed into service. Just a week ago, he had been commanding a merchant vessel carrying supplies between colonies. Now he wore a military uniform and commanded enough firepower to level a city. His crew was a mix of veterans and volunteers. Chief Engineer Rachel Kim had left her job at a civilian shipyard to join the fight. She had 2 children of her own and couldn't stop thinking about the orphans who had died. Weapons Officer Ben Harper had been a school teacher until he saw the footage from New Haven. His hands shook the first time he targeted an enemy ship, but they were steady now. The transformation wasn't just about ships and weapons. Human society itself was changing. Children as young as 12 were learning to operate factory equipment. Elderly people who had retired years ago returned to work in military production facilities. Every human colony contributed whatever it could to the war effort. Major Kate Lewis commanded one of the new special operations units that General Stone had authorized. Her teams trained for missions that would have been unthinkable during previous conflicts. They learned to sabotage power plants, poison water supplies, and destroy communication networks. The goal was not just to defeat Keth military forces, but to collapse their entire society. Kate's soldiers were volunteers who had been horrified by the orphanage attack. Sergeant Bill Murphy had lost his own family to a Keth raid 2 years earlier. Corporal Lisa Hayes was a former nurse who had treated war orphans before deciding she wanted to fight instead of just heal. Private Joe Collins was Jake Collins's older brother, who had been serving on a distant world when the attack happened. Meanwhile, Dr. Helen Price worked in a secret laboratory, developing new weapons specifically designed to target Keth biology. Her team included scientists from every human world, all working together to create tools of war that other species would consider barbaric. The Keth nervous system is particularly sensitive to certain electromagnetic frequencies, she explained to her research team. We can design weapons that cause extreme pain without immediate death. The goal is to create terror, not just casualties. Her assistant, Dr. Mark Johnson, looked uncomfortable. Doctor, are we sure this is necessary? These weapons violate several galactic treaties. Price looked at him coldly. The Keth violated the treaty against attacking civilians when they murdered our children. We're simply responding in kind. The surviving children from the orphanage had become symbols of the war effort. Jake Collins, now 15, traveled to military bases across human space. He spoke to new recruits about what he had witnessed, his voice steady as he described watching his friends die. They didn't just kill children, he told a group of volunteers at a training facility. They killed hope. They killed innocence. They killed everything good we were trying to build. His sister Emma, now 9, appeared in recruitment videos that were broadcast across human space. The sight of her small face asking, "Why did they hurt my friends?" moved millions of people to join the war effort. Sam Torres, the boy who had found his voice during the attack, became a spokesman for war orphans throughout human space. He spoke at rallies and appeared on news broadcasts, always ending his speeches with the same words: "No more dead children." The Keth Dominion watched humanity's mobilization with growing concern. Their intelligence reports showed production, numbers that seemed impossible. Human industrial capacity was increasing by 20% every month. New ships were entering service faster than they could be counted. Keth Supreme Commander Vextar called an emergency meeting of his war council. The reptilian leaders gathered in their command center on the Keth homeworld, studying holographic displays showing human military buildups. "How is this possible?" Vextar demanded. "No species can mobilize this quickly." Intelligence Chief Zekmar hissed in frustration. "They have converted their entire civilization to war production. Every factory, every shipyard, every resource, extraction facility is now serving military purposes. Then we will destroy their factories," Vextar said. "Which ones? They have facilities on 137 worlds. Our latest count shows over 10,000 production sites." War leader Thokoval slammed his clawed hand on the table. "We should have killed them all years ago. Now they breed like parasites and build weapons like machines." Admiral Marcus Cole led the first major human offensive against Keth territory. His expanded fleet of 200 ships moved toward the Keth outer colonies with a mission that shocked even veteran military officers. "We're not targeting their military bases first," Cole explained to his captains during a secure briefing. "We're going after their civilian infrastructure: power plants, communication networks, food distribution centers, water treatment facilities." Captain Miller raised his hand. "Sir, what about civilian casualties?" Cole's face was stone. "The Keth had no concern for civilian casualties when they murdered our children. We're simply applying their own rules of engagement." The first target was a Keth colony world called Sektar. It was primarily an agricultural world that supplied food to a dozen Keth military installations. The human fleet arrived at the edge of the system and began systematic destruction of every facility on the planet. They destroyed grain silos and processing plants. They targeted irrigation systems and farm equipment. They obliterated communication relays and transportation networks. Within 6 hours, a world that had fed millions was reduced to isolated communities with no way to communicate or distribute resources. The Keth military base on Sektar tried to respond, but the human fleet ignored it completely. Cole's ships finished destroying civilian infrastructure and left without firing a single shot at military targets. Major Lewis's special operations teams infiltrated 3 Keth worlds simultaneously. They moved through cities like ghosts, sabotaging critical systems without being detected. Power grids failed across entire continents. Water treatment plants stopped functioning. Communication networks went silent. The attacks were designed to create maximum disruption with minimal human casualties. Keth civilians woke up to find their modern civilization collapsing around them. No power, no clean water, no communication with the outside world. On the Keth homeworld, panic began to spread through the civilian population. Reports came in of mysterious failures across their empire. Entire star systems were going dark. Supply lines were being severed. Colony worlds were calling for help that couldn't be sent. Dr. Price's new weapons were deployed for the first time against a Keth military outpost. The electromagnetic pulse weapons didn't kill immediately, but they caused excruciating pain that lasted for days. Keth soldiers who were exposed to the weapons begged for death rather than endure the constant agony. Videos of the affected Keth soldiers were broadcast throughout their empire. The message was clear: surrender or suffer. The galactic community watched humanity's campaign with horror and fascination. Species that had considered humans relatively peaceful were seeing a side of humanity they had never imagined existed. The Altaran ambassador sent desperate messages to Earth asking for restraint. The Traders Guild begged for negotiations. Even the warlike Saurian Empire expressed concern about humanity's methods. Ambassador Green's response was the same to every request. When the Keth agree to face war crimes, tribunals for murdering our children, we will discuss terms. Until then, we will continue to apply their own standards of warfare. The Keth military, trained for conventional battles between fleets and armies, struggled to respond to humanity's total war doctrine. Their soldiers didn't know how to fight an enemy that targeted farms and power plants instead of military bases. Keth colonies that had never seen combat were suddenly isolated and helpless. Worlds that had supported the war effort by producing supplies found themselves cut off from all support. Civilian populations that had cheered Keth military victories began demanding peace. Supreme Commander Vextar realized that humanity was not trying to defeat the Keth military. They were trying to destroy Keth civilization itself. Every day brought new reports of infrastructure failures, communication breakdowns, and civilian unrest. For the first time in Keth history, their leadership began to fear that they might lose a war. Humanity had shown them what total war really meant, and they were learning that some enemies were too dangerous to provoke. The children of bright stars had been avenged, but the war was far from over. Humanity had tasted total victory, and they found they had an appetite for it. 6 months after the attack on Bright Star's children's home, the Keth Dominion was collapsing. Half of their colony worlds had lost all communication with the central government. Supply lines that had fed their empire for centuries were completely destroyed. Millions of Keth civilians faced starvation as agricultural worlds went dark one by one. Admiral Marcus Cole stood on the bridge of his flagship as the largest human fleet ever assembled approached the Keth home system. 300 warships moved in perfect formation toward the world where the decision to murder children had been made. The Keth home fleet tried to intercept them at the edge of the system. 40 Keth battleships against 300 human vessels. The battle lasted less than 2 hours. When it was over, the space around the Keth homeworld was filled with debris from destroyed alien ships. Captain Tony Miller watched from the USS Retribution as the last Keth battleship exploded. His weapons officer Ben Harper reported no damage to any human ships. The Keth military had fought bravely, but they were outnumbered and outgunned by humanity's war machine. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface," reported Communications Officer Janet Ross. On the main screen appeared the image of Keth Supreme Commander Vextar. The proud reptilian leader looked exhausted. His scales had lost their shine and his yellow eyes showed fear for the first time in his life. "Human fleet, this is Supreme Commander Vextar. I request immediate negotiations for ceasefire." Cole's response was broadcast to every ship in the fleet and recorded for transmission throughout the galaxy. "Supreme Commander, 6 months ago your forces murdered 265 human children in a clearly marked civilian facility. Today we have come to collect payment for that debt. We are prepared to discuss terms," Vextar said desperately. "There are no terms to discuss. There is only surrender, complete and unconditional surrender of the entire Keth Dominion." The transmission ended. Cole turned to his fleet commanders on the communication channel. "You have your orders. Begin orbital. Bombardment of all military installations, government facilities, and infrastructure targets. Avoid civilian residential areas when possible. But make it clear that continued resistance will result in total planetary destruction." The bombardment began at noon, Keth local time. Human ships systematically destroyed every military base on the planet. Government buildings vanished in bursts of plasma fire. Communication towers, power plants, and transportation networks were reduced to smoking craters. On the surface, Keth civilians watched their mighty empire's capital burn. The beings who had conquered dozens of worlds and terrorized entire star systems were learning what it felt like to be helpless. Major Kate Lewis led her special operations teams through the underground tunnels beneath the Keth capital city. Her mission was to capture the government officials responsible for ordering the Orphanage attack. They moved through the darkness like shadows, avoiding Keth security forces and civilian areas. "Target building in sight," reported Sergeant Bill Murphy through his radio. The massive structure housed the Keth Military Command Center where the decision to attack defenseless children had been made. The human soldiers planted charges at key structural points. When the building collapsed, it took with it the last symbol of Keth military power. Officials who had planned genocide were buried under tons of rubble and their own arrogance. In space above the planet, Dr. Helen Price monitored the deployment of her psychological warfare weapons. Electromagnetic pulses designed to cause maximum fear and confusion swept across Keth population centers. The weapons didn't kill, but they made it impossible for the Keth to organize any resistance. "Effects are as predicted," she reported to Admiral Cole. "Keth command structure is completely disrupted. They can't coordinate military responses or civilian evacuations." The attacks continued for 3 days. Every Keth military installation in the system was destroyed. Government facilities were reduced to rubble. The proud capital of an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was transformed into a landscape of smoking ruins and terrified civilians. On the 4th day, Vextar appeared on every communication channel still functioning on the Idur planet. The once mighty commander was broadcasting from a damaged civilian building, his uniform torn and his scales covered in dust. "Human fleet, this is Vextar. The Keth Dominion formally surrenders. We accept all terms of unconditional surrender. Please stop the bombardment." Admiral Cole's response was broadcast to every world in known space. "Supreme Commander Vextar, humanity accepts your surrender. However, surrender is only the beginning of justice for the children you murdered." The terms of surrender were harsh beyond anything seen in galactic history. Every Keth military officer above the rank of captain was to be turned over for war crimes trials. The Keth would pay massive reparations to build new orphanages and schools throughout human space. All Keth military technology would be turned over to human authorities. Most importantly, the Keth homeworld would be placed under human military occupation for 50 years. Human governors would oversee the rebuilding of Keth society according to human standards of civilized behavior. The surviving children from Bright Star's children's home attended the formal surrender ceremony on the Keth homeworld. Jake Collins, now 16, stood with Admiral Cole as Vextar signed the surrender documents. "This is for Lisa Brown and Kevin Walsh and all the teachers who died protecting us," Jake said quietly. "This is for the children who will never grow up because of what you did." Emma Collins, now 10 years old, placed a wreath at the memorial built on the site where the orphanage had stood. The monument bore the names of every child who had died, along with a simple inscription, "They touched our children. They learned why that was a mistake." Sam Torres, the boy who had found his voice during the attack, spoke at the ceremony.
His words were broadcast to every world in the galaxy. "Today we have justice for our friends who died. But this is not about revenge. This is about making sure no other children ever suffer like we did. We fought this war so that orphanages will
be safe forever." The galactic community watched the ceremony with mixed feelings. Humanity had achieved total victory, but at a cost that shocked many species. The Keth Dominion, once a major galactic power, had been reduced to a occupied territory. Ambassador Daniel Green addressed the reformed Galactic Council from the Keth homeworld. Behind him, human ships maintained orbital positions above the conquered planet. The Keth Dominion chose to make war on children. Humanity responded by showing them what real war looks like. Let this serve as a lesson to any species that considers targeting civilian populations. The new galactic laws that emerged from the war were comprehensive and absolute. Any attack on clearly marked civilian facilities would result in immediate military intervention by a coalition of species. Orphanages, schools, and hospitals were declared completely off-limits under all circumstances. More importantly, the galaxy had learned that humanity possessed a capacity for total war that few species could match. When provoked beyond a certain point, humans would abandon all restraint and fight with a dedication that bordered on terrifying. The Keth themselves, under human occupation, began to rebuild their society along different lines. Children who had been taught that might made right learned about compassion and protection of the innocent. Former military officers worked in the new orphanages being built throughout their territory. War Commander Thekvar, the Keth representative, who had called the orphanage a legitimate target, was sentenced to life in prison. He spent his remaining years working in a human-run children's hospital, caring for young patients under the supervision of former orphans. 5 years after the surrender, Jake Collins returned to New Haven as a captain in the human Space Force. The site of Bright Star's children's home had been transformed into the largest children's sanctuary in the galaxy. Thousands of war orphans from dozens of species found safety and hope there. Emma Collins became a teacher at the new facility. She worked with children who had experienced trauma, helping them heal and find their voices again. Her classroom walls were covered with pictures drawn by her students, bright images of peace and happiness. Sam Torres grew up to become a diplomat, working to prevent conflicts before they could start. He traveled throughout the galaxy speaking about the importance of protecting children and civilians during wartime. The memorial to the original Bright Star's children remained at the center of the new complex. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see the simple monument and read the names of the children who had died. Many left flowers and toys, small tributes to innocence lost and justice gained. The Keth learned to live under human occupation, and gradually many came to understand why their attack had been so terribly wrong. A new generation of Keth children grew up learning human values of compassion and protection for the vulnerable. The galaxy was more peaceful than it had been in centuries. No species wanted to risk provoking humanity's total war doctrine. Children throughout known space slept safely, protected by the knowledge that their deaths would be avenged with overwhelming force. Humanity had proven that they could be the most compassionate species in the galaxy, building orphanages and schools wherever they went. But